Hello and welcome to this week's lecture. Before I get started talking about ethics and copyright, I just want to remind you that this is a 2-week week because of Thanksgiving. So I'm posting this lecture the Wednesday morning before Thanksgiving on Thursday, and you won't have another lecture and set of assignments until 2 weeks from now. And your papers will be due 12/4, 2 weeks from now also, your research reference interview papers. But you won't be finding another lecture or another set of assignments, readings and stuff for me until then. So the readings for this week actually did a very good job of covering ethical issues within librarianship. There's a few areas that I'll emphasize in this lecture, but I urge you to read the chapter carefully, and the links that I've given you to do with Code of Ethics, Library Bill of Rights, and the AASL Intellectual Freedom Brochure, just so that you're familiar with the ethics of our profession, which include, the Code of Ethics includes, it says that we owe our patrons the highest level of service. We owe them intellectual freedom, to protect their intellectual freedom, since fighting censorship and providing freedom to read. We need to respect their privacy, which includes nature of their questions, the information they request, and information about the material they borrow. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in particular with students in another slide. We need to teach our students how to respect intellectual property, and that's where the copyright part comes into the Code of Ethics. Continue our own education to help patrons better. Treat our coworkers with respect, models ethical behavior, and is a good thing to do. Professional duty over personal interests, so don't accept something from a vendor because they promise you something personally. In this state, I don't know if you are also considered, I'm considered a state employee, so I have to do this ethical thing every 3 years and brush-ups every year where they tell you what you can and can't take from individuals, and it talks about vendors and not just accepting things from vendors. Your personal beliefs should not interfere with the provision of access. So you might not agree with what a patron wants in the library, but you need to accommodate their interests. For a good example is, I've worked with people, and actually they weren't librarians, although some librarians do feel this way, that romance novels are not appropriate in the public libraries because they don't think romance novels, they don't like them, and they think that they are not worth anything. But that's just their opinion and shouldn't interfere with access to reading that people want to read. And actually there's been some interesting studies about what role romance novels play for women in giving them time of their own, and a pursuit of that is their own pursuit and their own time that they feel like they are allowed to spend reading, because reading is something good, and what they learn and gain from reading romance novels. There's a fascinating book called Reading the Romance that talks about how important romance novels are in some women's lives. So basically, provide the highest level of service, resist efforts to censor library resources, respect intellectual property rights, treat co-workers with respect, distinguish between personal conviction and professional duties, don't allow your personal beliefs to interfere with provision of access to information resources, and strive for excellence by maintaining personal knowledge and skills. Access is about equitable access, providing access for everybody, and that's part of what the Library Bill of Rights talks about. And I have this link in today's tab, in the tab for this week. basic policies. Books and library resources should be provided for the interest, information, and enlightenment of all people that the community serves. So that's why when people try to say we shouldn't have LGBTQ material, you serve LGBTQ people. And just because some people don't agree with it, you might not agree with or feel comfortable with LGBTQ material, but they're part of the community and they should not be excluded because of their origin, background, or views of those contributing to their creation. So you have to be really careful why you don't bring a book into the library. The library should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historical issues. Should not be removed or prescribed because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval. Maybe you don't agree with some of the opinions held by other people or facts. This gets tough in the era of fake news. I don't think we should have fake news available, but certainly different points of view on issues. And we all know that if people look at the same thing, even with the same facts, they're going to interpret them differently. Challenge censorship. Cooperate with all persons and groups concerned with resisting abridgment of free expression and free access to ideas. Right to use the library should not be denied or abridged because of origin, age, background, or views, as long as they are not threatening the safety of anybody within the library. It's become problematic now with hate groups wanting to use the library. And I kind of equate that to yelling fire in a crowded theater, which is the classic, you have the First Amendment right to say anything. You have a First Amendment right to speech, but you don't have the right to yell fire in a crowded theater when it's not on fire because people can get hurt. Libraries, and this is, you won't have exhibit space or meeting rooms, but they should make their facilities available on an equitable basis, regardless of the beliefs or affiliations of individuals or groups requesting their use. Again, this has become a difficult thing because of hate groups requesting use of libraries, or people having workers being in the library when people who consider them non-people coming in and using the meeting room. So there has been some issues about how to parse this so that you're not going down a slippery slope of saying, well, just because I don't agree with that person means they can't use the library meeting space, rather than this person is actively threatening harm to one of our employees. And they're still working on some wording around some interesting around issues to do with exhibit spaces and particularly meeting rooms. There's a special statement about access to resources and services in the school library. That's a particular interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights as it pertains to the school library. And I'm not going to read the whole thing out to you, but basically, I'd like you to read it. There's a link to it, but it calls for equitable access, providing intellectual freedom and free inquiry, providing material in multiple languages. The intellectual and free inquiry includes teaching students to locate, evaluate, and use a broad range of ideas effectively, educating students in the use of critical thinking skills to empower them to pursue free inquiry responsibly and independently. And these words were in there before 2016 and some of the issues that have arisen since then, because we always want our students to develop critical thinking skills that allows them to do research and evaluate what's available and responsibly come to find material and use it well. We need to think about reducing barriers, such as imposing age, grade level, or reading level restrictions on the use of resources. Teachers that come into the library and bring their classrooms in and dictate in your library that students can only take out books that are at their reading level. that's really not something that is appropriate to happen in the school library. If the teacher wants to have their students reading a book at their reading level, that's fine, but then they should be allowed to take another book that's a book of interest to them, because we often find that students will work a lot harder to read something that's really just interesting to them. So this idea of, no, you can't take out that book because it's not a Lexile level that matches yours or reading level, is really a barrier to access. It limits the use of the student's use of resources. You shouldn't be limiting the use of interlibrary loan, access to electronic information, charging fees for information in specific formats, requiring permission from parents and teachers for certain books. If the parent is adamant that his or her child cannot take out certain books, then we have to respect that. That shouldn't be a decision that you make for the child. Shouldn't establish restricted shelves or closed collections. Labeling can also be problematic, and by labeling, it doesn't mean like this is a ghost story, this is a historical story, but like only ages 10 and up can read this, because you don't know where that person is, what they can handle, and what their parents believe they can handle. Policies, procedures, and rules related to the use of resources should support free and open access to information. I talked a little bit about access, I think, last week when we talked about fines and how that could be problematic for access. If the student can no longer take out books because of owing fines due to circumstances beyond their control, that's a barrier to access to resources. And now I know there's mitigating factors in all of these things, but we need to think about how is the best way we can get students access to as much information as they can have. Filters are also harmful to free access. They can keep students from finding information they need. If you have high schoolers doing a project on cancer and one decides to do breast cancer because that's what his mom has or that's what his mom died of, but the word breast is on a filter and doesn't allow anything to come through on breast cancer, you are really limiting access, because probably that student is not going to come up to you and ask you to let that filter go, to override the filter, if you can even do that. And it may be information they need that they're not willing to come up to you and ask for. So the problem with filters also is that they give a false sense of security. Filters don't work well. They filter things that shouldn't be filtered and let through things that should be let through. So depending on filters to do all of the work of keeping students safe is not a good thing, because that shouldn't be the only way that we work to help our students understand what they should and shouldn't access on the internet. If they walk out of your library and look on their phone, there's no filters on their phone and they can access everything. So we need to teach them what should be accessed, how to evaluate what comes up on their phone, how to do searches so that they get the information that they need and that they have access to what they need. Students' privacy rights. From the AASL position statement on the confidentiality of library records. The library community recognizes that children and youth have the same rights to privacy as adults. And recognizing the right to privacy, believe that records held in libraries which connect specific individuals with specific resources, programs, or services are confidential and not to be used for purposes other than routine record keeping. So that essentially means that when students come in, when students take books out, other students should not be given privy access to what they have out. The principal should not know what books the student has out. Other teachers should not know what books the student has out. Now, some of this is impossible to when the students are in the library and they're taking books out, of course other people are going to see what they're taking, and other teachers might see what they're taking, and the volunteers will see what they're taking. But as far as the student records within the system, they should not be shared with the principal, should not be shared with teachers. Volunteers, what happens in the library stays in the library. They should be told that if they see their neighbor's, their friend's child take out a book that they don't think their mom would want them to be taking out, the volunteer cannot say anything to the mom. They should not be sharing that information with other parents. It is between the mom and that kid what goes on at the library. That you shouldn't be sharing. They should not be sharing information. They should not be overseeing what other students, kids, volunteers come in with their own ideas of what they think kids should and shouldn't have, and that should be nipped in the bud really quickly. They don't have any say over what students can take out. So free access means privacy. Whatever a user is researching should be kept confidential, or it could have a chilling effect, thereby restricting access. And even though schools are required to act in loco parentis, the doctrine only applies to school librarians when it comes to the safety and health of their students, not when it comes to censorship or to abridging privacy. There is some conversations to be had about when you think a student's well-being might be impacted and whether information should be shared in order to protect a student who might be thinking about committing suicide. But that should be a very narrow band of students and shared very narrowly, and not as censorship but as concern. There's a story about a school librarian in Wisconsin who said her principal insisted on a list of every book a certain student had checked out since his first day of school. No explanation offered. She knew the boy liked to read about drugs, weapons, and war, and feared the information would end up at the hands of the local police, which it's not the school librarian's place to share it. As a matter of fact, most libraries, and it's a good practice to be in, you should not even have that information to give to anybody. Once the book is returned, then you shouldn't have a record of what the student has been taking out over the school year in order to ensure privacy. If you don't have it, you can't share it, and it protects student privacies. Of course, the principal needs to support this. Some principals are not even aware of this. If you're a non-tenured librarian, there may be nothing you can do about it when a principal comes in and says that they need the records, but I would let them know that it's not best practice in your community and it's violating students' privacy rights. No state law gives teachers or principals the right to access a student's librarian's circulation record, and only 15 states give caregivers the authority to view their children's records. Now, in practice, it can be really hard because parents come in and want to know what book they're looking for that their student has, and you kind of have to decide whether or not that's going to be something you're going to share with them. Posting what books students or what overdue books students have on a teacher's door is probably something you should rethink. Okay, copyright. This is about ethically using information. I have posted some of these here. There's a really cool copyright guide. Copyright is crazy. It's just really hard. It's been changed quite a bit. Copyright's been extended and extended and extended. There's some really interesting articles about Mickey Mouse and copyright protection and how, in order to keep him copyright protected, some of these laws have been passed. Generally, if it's before 1923, it's in the public domain and you don't need permission. And this is a little slider thing. So if you look at a copyright date and say it was published between 1963 and before 1978, and it has a copyright notice, permission might be needed. So you can see how crazy this is, that it doesn't even really, you can't even really tell for sure. Protected through 2059 or longer, 95 years from publication. So it's really crazy how restrictive. If it was published after 1977, before 1989, published without but registered within 5 years, or published. Some of this you can't know. It's just really hard to know. But you can kind of assume that permission's very often needed for making copies of whole books and sharing them with the class. That's a violation of copyright. Taking a small quote from a book and using it with citation is a different story. That is allowed. And as a matter of fact, fair use dictates how you can use some copyrighted work. You have to consider the purpose and character of the use. Is it a citation in an article that gives permission back, gives citation to the person that wrote it? What kind of work is it? How much are you using, and the effect on the potential market? That's why I don't feel bad sharing the chapters for this year, for the book that we're using this semester, because the new book is not out and the old book's out of print. I'm not affecting the potential market because I can't get the book. So I'm not impacting the sales for that particular book. When it comes back into print, the next class of people will have to, unfortunately, buy the book. I thought I had fixed this. Fair use. University of Minnesota has a good, and I believe I fixed it on the tab, they used to have a really cool copyright tool, but that's now under password, but they talk about purpose and character. Education, scholarship, research, news reporting, criticism, commentary, nonprofit purposes tend to favor, and they don't mean, oh, I'm using it for education, I can do what I want, tend to favor fair use. The nature of the original work, so is it published or not? And more factual, more creative, you can't protect facts. Somebody tried to copyright, with this ridiculous thing with Whitaker, somebody tried to copyright a chicken and waffle sandwich. Not the name of the sandwich, which is actually trademarking, I think, but wanted to copyright the sandwich. You can't copyright a sandwich. You can't copyright a fact. You can't copyright the fact that Pluto is a dwarf planet now. So how much is used is another. A quote of 250 words from a 300-word poem might be less fair than a quote of 250 words from a many thousand-word article. And the effect of the potential market. So that's something to keep in mind with fair use. Creative Commons is really interesting because as people worried about the long restrictive period of copyright, which has been argued to work against intellectual freedom and sharing of ideas. I think original copyright was like life plus 20 years, or just the life of the person, and it allowed people to make money from their own work for their life, but not beyond their life, and made a lot more sense. And now, as we saw, 95 years past whatever, it gets complicated. So people decided to develop what's called the Creative Commons licensing. So you can create something, and this works particularly well on the internet. You can create something that you want to share, but you don't want people to worry about copyright and limit their use of this through restrictive copyright issues. So these Common Core licenses allow you to see how the original creator feels about you using what permissions they want to give you. And the most widely, the permission that gives the license that gives the most permission is attribution. And this just meant that you can do anything, distribute, remix, tweak, build upon it, even make money from it, as long as you credit the person for the original creation. Attribution and share alike means you can do anything, but you have to give the same license. So you have to, if you built upon somebody else's work for commercial purposes, you have to, if you built upon it and it was this attribution share alike, you cannot restrict it to commercial. You cannot restrict another person's ability to build on your work for commercial purposes. It has to be the same. This one, you can't change it, and this one you can't you can only use it non-commercially. You can't make money from it. Here it's non-commercial share alike, non-commercial no derivatives. So when you see, let me see, I think they have, this is where it shows. This is the legal parlance, what you're allowed to do. And it usually in the, and here's the legal call. I'll show you in the next thing what it looks like actually in something. So this is it's a great Center for the Study of Public Domain. It's a great comic book for learning about copyright. And it's actually done under Creative Commons. You need to attribute the work, give it attribution. You cannot make money from the work. And if you alter it at all or build upon it, you have to distribute it, also attribution non-commercial. You cannot make money upon it, even if you change it. So that's it. Not only does it give you these little symbols, it explains it to you. You'll find this often on the internet and images. You can do a search in Google where it gives you licenses. Flickr actually is Flickr has a lot of common. Let me see if I can find something quickly where it'll say the licensing. Okay, see, this one's all rights reserved. So if we found something that was, it must be in the professional one, because it'll be here. If you look on Flickr, if you use that, this means all rights reserved. You really shouldn't use it in your presentations without permission. If it were to give you the little codes for the common Creative Commons, then you could use it. All right. So this comic book goes through actually somebody making a documentary film where they have to use images and music is probably more restrictive than text in terms of copyright. So it's a good comic book, and it also gives that where we had the slider thing before, it gives you some indication of what can be used when. You can access this digitally for free. You can also buy it if you want to keep a copy in your library when people ask about copyright. But it is a well-researched and interesting way to present copyright to your students. Okay, and that is it. I will see you on the discussion board and see you back on the screen in 2 weeks. Thank you.